There are moments in life when a person suddenly looks back at something they once tried to understand and realizes that they were asking the wrong question all along. Your soulmate may be experiencing that kind of moment now. For a long time, they may have wondered why this connection became so complicated, why certain conversations felt heavier than they expected, why they could not simply treat it like an ordinary chapter and move on without looking back. They may have tried to explain everything through timing, circumstances, distance, responsibilities, or misunderstandings. Those things may have played a part, but underneath all of those explanations was something much deeper. This connection made them see themselves differently. And sometimes, seeing yourself clearly can be more uncomfortable than losing someone. At the beginning, your soulmate may not have understood what was happening inside them. They may have felt drawn toward the connection and, at the same time, wanted to protect themselves from it. One part of them wanted closeness. Another part wanted control. One part wanted to speak honestly. Another part warned them not to reveal too much. One part wanted to trust. Another remembered every reason trust could become dangerous. So instead of following what they felt, they may have followed what seemed safer. They created distance. They became quieter. They focused on other parts of life. They convinced themselves that emotions would eventually settle down, and perhaps for a while it seemed like that plan was working. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Life continued moving. There were responsibilities to handle, people to meet, goals to pursue, and countless ordinary moments that filled their attention. But something unexpected happened. The feeling did not disappear simply because they stopped talking about it. Instead, it became quieter. And sometimes quiet emotions are the ones people understand the most slowly. They may have discovered that forgetting someone is not the same as no longer thinking about them. A memory can become less frequent and still remain meaningful. A person can continue living their life and still recognize that one particular connection changed something within them. That may be what your soulmate is beginning to accept. They are not necessarily living in the past. They are simply understanding the past with more maturity. There is a difference. Before, they may have judged the connection based on how it ended, how complicated it became, or what they believed they had to protect themselves from. Now they may be looking at the entire experience, the beginning, the middle, the misunderstandings, the moments of closeness, the moments of silence, the things they said, and especially the things they left unsaid. That last part may be especially difficult, because people often regret what they did more easily than what they failed to do. They can explain an action, they can defend a decision, but it is harder to explain why they stayed silent when honesty might have changed everything. Your soulmate may be thinking about those moments now. Perhaps there were times when they wanted to tell you what they were really feeling but chose another response. Perhaps they wanted to ask questions but were afraid of the answers. Perhaps they wanted reassurance but did not know how to request it. Perhaps they cared more than they allowed themselves to show. At the time, they may have believed that hiding their emotions gave them strength. Now they may understand that emotional control and emotional suppression are not the same thing. Being calm does not mean pretending you feel nothing. Being independent does not mean refusing meaningful connection. Being strong does not mean never admitting that something matters. These are lessons people sometimes learn only after experiencing the consequences of avoiding them. Your soulmate may now be recognizing one of their own patterns. Whenever something mattered deeply, they became cautious. Whenever they felt vulnerable, they looked for an escape. Whenever uncertainty appeared, they wanted an answer immediately. And whenever they could not predict the outcome, they preferred distance. That pattern may have protected them in certain situations, but it may also have prevented them from experiencing closeness in the way they truly wanted. This realization can be emotional, because growth often requires admitting that something we once considered protection was sometimes also a limitation. Your soulmate may not be blaming themselves. Instead, they may finally be understanding themselves. There is a big difference between saying, "I ruined everything," and saying, "I understand now why I behaved that way." The first statement creates shame. The second creates awareness. And awareness gives a person the opportunity to change. That may be what is happening inside your soulmate. They are beginning to see that they were not always responding to the present moment. Sometimes they were responding to old fears. A small misunderstanding may have felt much bigger because it reminded them of something from the past. A request for closeness may have felt like pressure. A difficult conversation may have felt like a threat to their independence. And instead of explaining these feelings, they may have withdrawn, not because they did not care, but because they did not know how to remain present while feeling uncomfortable. Now they may understand that. They may realize that another person cannot be expected to understand emotions that are never communicated. People cannot always guess what is happening behind silence. They cannot know what someone needs if that person never expresses it. And they cannot build trust with someone who keeps changing the distance between them without explanation. This realization may be making your soulmate more thoughtful. They may be replaying certain moments differently. A conversation that once seemed ordinary may now feel significant. A small gesture that they once overlooked may now appear meaningful. A moment when they felt peaceful around you may now stand out among all the complicated memories. Because as time passes, people often become less distracted by the intensity of an experience and more aware of its emotional truth. Your soulmate may be realizing that what mattered was not perfection. There was no perfect conversation, no perfect timing, no perfect version of either person. What mattered was the feeling of being seen. Perhaps around you, they experienced moments when they did not have to perform. They did not have to appear completely confident. They did not have to have every answer. They could simply exist as themselves. That kind of comfort can be difficult to replace. And sometimes people only recognize its value after experiencing environments where they feel understood less often. This may be why the connection remains significant in their thoughts. Not because every memory is perfect, not because the past should automatically be repeated, but because something about the connection revealed a truth they had not fully understood before. They wanted deeper emotional honesty. They wanted someone who could see beyond their surface. They wanted to feel safe enough to be imperfect. Yet at the same time, they were afraid of exactly those things. That contradiction may have created much of the confusion. They wanted closeness but feared dependence. They wanted honesty but feared vulnerability. They wanted understanding but struggled to explain themselves. They wanted certainty before taking an emotional step. And now they may finally understand that certainty was never going to arrive first. Sometimes trust develops because two people are willing to communicate while things are still uncertain. Sometimes closeness develops because people allow themselves to be known gradually. Sometimes emotional safety is created through repeated honest actions rather than guaranteed outcomes. Your soulmate may be learning that now, and this lesson could change more than their understanding of one connection. It could change the way they approach every meaningful relationship. From this point forward, they may become more willing to say what they mean, more willing to listen without immediately becoming defensive, more willing to admit when they are confused, more willing to acknowledge when someone matters. And perhaps most importantly, they may stop believing that caring gives another person complete power over them. Caring is not surrender. Vulnerability is not weakness. Honesty is not losing control. These are ideas your soulmate may be slowly discovering. But there is another realization waiting beneath all of this. They may be beginning to understand that some connections are not measured only by whether two people remain together every day. Sometimes a connection changes the direction of your personal growth. It teaches you what you need to heal. It reveals what you value. It exposes habits you can no longer ignore. It makes you question the walls you built long before the other person arrived. And when someone leaves an experience with greater self-awareness, that experience has already had meaning. Your soulmate may be arriving at that understanding now. They may no longer want to reduce everything to whether the connection succeeded or failed. They may be asking a deeper question. What did this experience teach me about who I am? That question can open a completely different chapter, because once someone understands the lesson, they no longer have to remain trapped inside the old pattern. They can choose differently. They can communicate differently. They can respond differently. They can become someone who does not run simply because something feels uncertain. And perhaps that is the most important change happening within your soulmate. They are not simply thinking about you. They are thinking about the person they became through knowing you. They are beginning to understand why certain emotions appeared, why certain fears surfaced, why certain moments stayed with them, and why even after trying to move forward, the connection continued to hold a quiet place in their memory. The realization may not arrive all at once. It may come through small moments. A quiet evening, an unexpected memory, a conversation with someone else, a situation that reminds them of an old pattern. And suddenly something clicks. They understand what they could not understand before. The connection was never only about another person, it was also about themselves. And once that truth becomes clear, they may begin looking at everything that happened with new eyes. Not with the same fear, not with the same defensiveness, but with greater honesty. And that is where their deeper transformation begins. Understanding the past can be powerful, but there comes a moment when understanding must become growth. Your soulmate may be reaching that moment now. They may have spent enough time looking backward to recognize what happened, why certain choices were made, and how fear influenced some of their decisions. But now another question begins to appear. What will they do differently from here? This is where their realization becomes deeper, because recognizing a mistake is only the beginning. Real change happens when a person decides they do not want to repeat the same pattern. Your soulmate may be starting to understand that. Perhaps they once believed that emotional situations became difficult because the other person expected too much. Now they may be questioning that belief. Maybe the problem was not always the expectations. Maybe the problem was that they did not know how to communicate their own boundaries, needs, and fears. Instead of explaining themselves, they may have expected others to understand automatically. Instead of asking for space, they may have simply created distance. Instead of saying, "I need time to process this," they may have disappeared into silence. At the time, these reactions may have seemed easier. Now they may recognize how confusing they could be for someone on the other side. That realization can make a person more compassionate, not only toward others, but toward themselves. Your soulmate may be learning that people often make choices based on the emotional tools they have at that moment. When they did not know how to communicate, they avoided. When they did not know how to process uncertainty, they tried to control it. When they did not know how to express vulnerability, they became distant. That does not mean every decision was right. It simply means they can understand where those decisions came from. And understanding the source of a behavior makes it easier to change the behavior. This may be why your soulmate seems to be entering a quieter stage. They are not necessarily trying to force anything. They may simply be observing themselves more carefully. They may notice when fear appears. They may notice when they feel the urge to withdraw. They may notice when their mind starts creating negative possibilities before anything has actually happened. And instead of immediately reacting, they may begin asking themselves, "Is this really happening? Or am I protecting myself from something I only imagine might happen? That single question can change everything, because fear often speaks in possibilities. It says, what if they leave? What if I get hurt? What if I trust them and regret it? What if I become vulnerable and lose control? But maturity learns to ask a different question. What is actually happening right now? Your soulmate may be learning to live more in the present instead of constantly preparing for future disappointment. That does not mean becoming careless. It means refusing to let imagined outcomes control every present decision. And perhaps this is one of the biggest lessons this connection brought into their life. They may have spent so much energy trying to avoid pain that they accidentally avoided some of the experiences that could have brought genuine happiness. They may have protected themselves so carefully that they also protected themselves from being fully known. Now they may see that emotional life cannot be managed like a perfect plan. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be things outside our control. There will always be moments when we have to trust our ability to communicate rather than our ability to predict. This can be frightening, but it can also be freeing. Your soulmate may no longer need every answer before taking a meaningful step. They may be becoming comfortable with saying, I don't know yet. I need time. This matters to me. I am afraid. I want to understand. These simple statements can require enormous courage from someone who once believed they had to appear certain all the time. And perhaps that is the version of themselves they are slowly becoming. Not someone without fear. Someone who no longer lets fear make every decision. There is another part of this realization that may be important. Your soulmate may finally understand that emotional connections are not competitions. There is no winner in silence. No victory in pretending not to care. No reward for seeing who can hold out longer without speaking. Sometimes pride creates distance that neither person truly wanted, and after enough time passes, a person may realize that protecting pride did not necessarily protect peace. This realization may be changing how they think about communication. They may now understand that saying what you feel does not guarantee the response you want. But silence does not guarantee safety either. At least honesty gives a person clarity. And clarity can be more valuable than temporary comfort. Your soulmate may therefore be becoming less concerned with controlling another person's reaction. They may be more concerned with expressing themselves truthfully and respectfully. That is a significant shift, because emotional maturity is not about controlling outcomes. It is about taking responsibility for your own words, choices, and behavior. Your soulmate may also be learning that an important connection does not require two perfect people. It requires two people willing to grow. Everyone brings history into relationships. Everyone has insecurities. Everyone has habits they are still working on. Everyone has moments when they communicate badly. The difference is what happens afterward. Do they defend themselves forever? Or do they learn? Do they blame? Or do they reflect? Do they repeat the pattern? Or do they become more aware? Your soulmate may be moving toward the second path. And that could be one reason the connection feels different in their mind now. They are no longer seeing it only through emotion. They are seeing it through perspective. They may understand that there were things you could have done differently too, but they may also understand that they cannot build their growth around waiting for another person to change. Their responsibility is their own. Your responsibility is yours. And sometimes real maturity means allowing another person to have their own journey without trying to control it. This does not make the connection meaningless. It makes it healthier. Your soulmate may be realizing that caring about someone does not mean possessing their future. It means respecting their choices while becoming honest about your own. That understanding can bring a surprising amount of peace. They may no longer feel the same need to force an answer. Instead, they may be willing to let life reveal what comes next. But they are also no longer hiding from what they know. They know the connection mattered. They know it affected them. They know there were lessons they needed to learn, and they know they do not want to return to the same emotional patterns that created confusion before. That awareness is valuable whether or not the future looks exactly as they once imagined. Sometimes people think growth must immediately produce an external result, a message, a reunion, a conversation, a dramatic change. But real growth often begins internally. Before someone changes their behavior, they change the way they understand themselves. Before they speak differently, they think differently. Before they make a new choice, they recognize the old pattern. Your soulmate may be somewhere in that process. They are learning. They are becoming more aware. They are reconsidering beliefs they once treated as facts. And perhaps one of those beliefs is that vulnerability automatically leads to disappointment. They may now understand that vulnerability simply reveals truth. Sometimes the truth is difficult. Sometimes it creates closeness. Sometimes it creates clarity. But hiding from truth does not make a person safer forever. It only delays the moment when they have to face it. Your soulmate may be less afraid of that moment now. They may understand that whatever happens, they can survive the discomfort of honesty. That is a powerful realization. It means they no longer need to pretend. They no longer need to make everything look easy. They no longer need to convince themselves that they never cared. They can simply acknowledge what was real. And perhaps that is the most peaceful place they could reach. A place where the past is neither romanticized nor rejected. It is simply understood. They can remember the good without denying the difficult. They can acknowledge the mistakes without allowing shame to define them. They can appreciate the lessons without needing to recreate every moment. And they can carry the growth forward. That is what the connection may ultimately have meant. Not that everything was destined to happen in one specific way. Not that every unanswered question has a hidden explanation. But that meeting another person can sometimes reveal parts of ourselves that were waiting to be understood. Your soulmate may now be realizing that you were part of that process. And because of that, the connection may always hold a certain significance in their personal story. But significance does not have to become obsession. Memory does not have to become a burden. And caring does not require losing yourself. They may be learning all three lessons at once. Perhaps they are finally understanding that the healthiest way to honor something meaningful is not to cling to it. It is to allow the lesson to make you better. If the future brings another opportunity for honest communication, they may be more prepared to meet it with maturity. If the future does not bring that opportunity immediately, they can still continue growing. Either way, they are no longer exactly the same person they were when the connection first began. Something has changed. They have become more aware of what they need, more aware of what they fear, more aware of how they communicate, more aware of the difference between independence and emotional distance, more aware that genuine connection requires courage. And perhaps most importantly, they are beginning to understand that peace does not come from controlling every outcome. Peace comes from knowing that you can face reality honestly. That is where your soulmate may be heading, toward a quieter confidence, toward emotional responsibility, toward a better understanding of what connection really means. And perhaps one day they will look back and realize that the greatest gift of this chapter was not simply the memory of another person. It was the person they became because they were forced to look inward. Some connections leave behind a question. Others leave behind a lesson. And the deepest ones can leave behind a transformation. Your soulmate may finally be recognizing which kind this was. They may finally understand that what mattered was never about creating a perfect story. It was about becoming more honest within their own story. And if they carry that lesson forward, then the past no longer needs to be repeated to remain meaningful. It has already done what meaningful experiences sometimes do. It changed the way they see themselves. It changed the way they understand connection, and it gave them the courage to become someone who can face the future without needing to control every step. Sometimes the heart does not need another explanation. It simply needs the wisdom to understand what the experience was trying to teach, and your soulmate may finally be there,